coffee shop fell silent. 23 people stopped mid-conversation, forks frozen halfway to mouth, as Captain Reynolds's voice cut through the morning chatter like a blade. Rear Admiral Caldwell. Those 3 words hung in the air, heavy with a truth I'd kept buried for 2 decades. My name is Thomas Caldwell, and for the past 20 years, I've been living a lie. Not the kind of lie that hurts people, but the kind that protects them from seeing you differently. You see, when I retired from the Navy, I made a decision that would define the rest of my civilian life. I would never tell anyone my real rank. To my neighbors, I was just Tom, the quiet guy who fixed bicycles in his garage and volunteered at the local food bank. To my co-workers at the hardware store, I was simply the reliable employee who knew his way around power tools and never complained about working weekends. But the truth was, I had commanded nuclear submarines, led operations in the most dangerous waters on Earth, and held the lives of thousands in my hands. The decision to hide came from watching other veterans struggle with civilian life. I'd seen too many good men become prisoners of their own glory, unable to move beyond their service records, expecting the world to bow to their past achievements. I didn't want that life. I wanted to earn respect through my actions in the present, not my accomplishments from decades ago. So I buried my medals in a dusty box, traded my dress blues for flannel shirts, and became just another face in the crowd. It was liberating in a way. For the first time in 35 years, people saw Tom the person, not Rear Admiral Caldwell, the decorated officer. But secrets have a way of weighing on your soul, don't they? Every Veterans Day, when people thanked me for my service, I'd nod politely and mumble something about just doing my part. When younger veterans at the VFW shared their struggles with PTSD or adapting to civilian life, I wanted desperately to tell them about my own journey, to share the wisdom that comes with 3.5 decades of military experience. Instead, I'd listen, offer what comfort I could as just another vet, and carry their pain home with me. The hardest moments came when I watched fellow service members being overlooked for jobs or dismissed because their military experience wasn't valued. I had the connections, the reputation, the influence to help. But Tom, the hardware store employee, couldn't make those calls that Rear Admiral Caldwell could. That morning in Murphy's Diner started like any other. I was sitting in my usual booth, reading the newspaper and working on the crossword puzzle, when Captain Reynolds walked in. I recognized him immediately. That unmistakable bearing, the way he scanned the room before choosing his seat, the precise way he folded his jacket. Even in civilian clothes, some things never change. He was maybe 45, still active duty by the look of him, probably stationed at the nearby base. I kept my head down, hoping to avoid the awkward small talk that sometimes happens when military folks recognize each other in public. But fate had different plans. The diner was packed that morning. Apparently, there was some sort of local festival, and Murphy's was the only place in town serving breakfast. Reynolds ended up at the table next to mine, close enough that I could hear him on the phone with what sounded like his commanding officer. The conversation was professional but tense. Budget cuts, personnel shortages, an upcoming inspection that could determine the future of several programs. I found myself listening, despite my better judgment, remembering the weight of similar conversations from my own career. Then the call ended, and Reynolds noticed me listening. "Sorry about that," he said with a tired smile. "Work troubles. You probably understand if you've served." Something in his voice, maybe the exhaustion or the genuine frustration, made me nod. "Navy," I said simply. "Retired." We started talking, just 2 veterans sharing war stories over coffee and eggs. He told me about the impossible standards, the political pressures, the way good programs get cut while wasteful ones survive. I found myself offering advice, sharing perspectives that surprised him with their depth and specificity. "You seem to know a lot about naval operations," he said, studying me more carefully. What was your rate? I hesitated. This was the moment I always dreaded. The fork in the road where I had to choose between honesty and anonymity. I was tired, though. Tired of hiding. Tired of watching from the sidelines while good people struggled with problems I could help solve. I was an officer, I said quietly. Submarine service, mostly. Reynolds's eyebrows went up. Which boats? And so it began. The slow unraveling of 20 years of careful secrecy. I told him about the USS Helena, the Pittsburgh, the operations I could discuss without violating classification. With each story, his expression grew more incredulous. Finally, he pulled out his phone and started typing. I watched his face change as he read whatever he'd found. His coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down. "Sir," he said, his voice suddenly formal, "I need to ask you something directly." The entire diner seemed to quiet down, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "Are you Thomas Caldwell? The Thomas Caldwell who commanded Submarine Squadron 15? The one who—" He trailed off, but I knew what he was asking. The commendations, the classified missions, the reputation that followed me like a shadow, even into retirement. I nodded, feeling 20 years of carefully constructed normalcy crumble around me. "Rear Admiral Caldwell," Reynolds said, loud enough for half the diner to hear. The words hit like a physical force. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. The waitress, who'd been calling me honey for 5 years, stood frozen with a coffee pot in her hand. What happened next changed everything. Instead of the awkwardness I'd feared, instead of people treating me differently or expecting something I couldn't give, I saw recognition in their eyes, not of my rank, but of the man they'd known all along. Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop smiled and said, "Well, that explains why you always stood so straight." Jimmy, the teenager I'd been mentoring at the community center, grinned and said, "Cool, Admiral Tom." They didn't see a decorated officer who'd been hiding among them. They saw Tom, their neighbor and friend, who just happened to have an extraordinary past. Captain Reynolds and I talked for 3 more hours that morning. By the time we left Murphy's, I'd agreed to speak at his command's next leadership seminar. Word spread through our small town like wildfire, but not in the way I'd expected. People weren't treating me like some untouchable hero. Instead, they seemed to understand why I'd kept quiet, and they respected me more for choosing to be just Tom when I could have demanded they call me Admiral. The box of medals came out of storage that night, not to display them, but to remember the men and women who'd served alongside me, the ones who never made it home, the ones whose stories deserved to be told. I realized that hiding my past hadn't just been about avoiding special treatment. It had been about fear. Fear that I wasn't worthy of the respect my rank commanded. Fear that my service had ended and I was nothing without it. But I was wrong. Service doesn't end with retirement. It just takes different forms. Now, instead of commanding submarines, I command respect through my actions in the community. Instead of leading sailors through dangerous missions, I guide young veterans through the dangerous waters of civilian life. And when Captain Reynolds introduces me at speaking engagements, he doesn't start with my rank. He starts with, "This is Tom Caldwell, a man who proves that true leadership isn't about the stars on your collar, but the impact you have on the people around you. The truth is, I'm still just Tom. I still fix bicycles and work at the hardware store and volunteer at the food bank. But now, I do it as someone who's finally learned that hiding your light doesn't make others shine brighter. It just makes the world a little dimmer, and in a world that needs all the light it can get, that's a luxury none of us can afford."